Margaret?
That was
Here.
no. You're gonna do it.
Want a wine?
Want a wine? We don't want any whiners.
We want
You're
wine.
gonna get a sign. Whiners go home. Yeah. Mike. Yeah. Did you bring us?
I did, but I can't tell you where it's at.
Man.
I think we were discussing boundary changes last meeting.
Yes. The maps are there, May 16th. I verified.
Were they on our agenda last time?
Yep.
I mean, conversation was, but were
Absolutely.
the maps on there?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Anyway,
well,
from-
then I'm not gonna say anything.
Right. No, I'll show you.
So I didn't do this. So to me, it's like now that you
I'll see you in a-
welcome. It's yours.
It's very nice. It costs a lot of money.
All right, I'm ready. Are you guys ready?
No, I want to wait.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order, please.
Specifically look
Before,
for maps earlier today.
okay, before I do an adoption of the agenda, for some reason, the printed agenda came out a little backwards, and it has a roll call before call to order. So obviously, I've just called us to order. So that is item 1.1, and now roll call will be item 1.2. So go ahead, Wendy.
Paul Banks.
Here.
Pam Howard.
Here.
Lori Visda Ward.
Here.
Barbara Cruz.
Here.
Dave Levy.
Here.
Mark Setter.
Here.
Jeff Swanty.
Thank you. Jeff, do you want to lead us in the pledge, please? Thank you. Pam, if you would like to read the mission statement.
The Thompson School District will be a school district that empowers, challenges, and inspires students, faculty, staff, parents, school leaders, and community members to learn, achieve, and excel.
Thank you. Next up is adoption of the agenda. There is one slight change just in order of items on the agenda. Item 5.1, which is public comment, should actually appear between item 3 and 4. So public participation, public comment will now be 4.1. Action items will be 5.1, and so far down the agenda. So with that change, is there anything else? Okay.
Should be it.
I will entertain a motion to approve the agenda with that change.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Wendy, if you'd call the roll, please.
Paul Banks.
Aye.
Pam Howard.
Aye.
Lori Visda Ward.
Aye.
Barbara Cruz.
Aye.
Dave Levy.
Aye.
Mark Setter.
Aye.
Jeff Swanty.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. First up then is approval of minutes from the May 16th meeting, and I will entertain a motion to approve those.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes from the regular meeting on Wednesday, May 16th. Are there any corrections, changes, Dave?
Yes. Excuse me, please. Yes, we requested, myself specifically, that the staff both provide an enhanced budget, but also an enhanced scope on the bond issues, such as when they say, as an example, when they say an extension on Berthoud L. What do you mean by that? Is it 4 rooms? What does it look like? As things advance, we need to have more detail flushed out. So I had a conversation with Gordon during the week. He understood what I wanted to say, but I just like to have that expressed in the minutes. And Gordon, am I correct in saying what I was asking for, you were going to get the answer, staff was going to provide some of those answers at the next meeting?
At the next meeting at I don't want to say
Yes, and you might want to comment on that later, but I just wanted to make sure that was, and I would ask, Madam President, is that the rule of the board? We get a little more detail there?
So, yes, if that's what we said then, and I.
It is what we
It is
said
what we
then. Oh,
said then.
absolutely.
Okay, so can you give that wording so
I-
that Wendy can pick that up? Did you give her something in writing or no?
No, I just.
No, we've had the conversation, so.
Okay, so you're-
I'll work with Dave to make sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Are we all okay with that, Board?
Thank you, Madam
Okay.
President.
Yep. Anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay, so basically with that change that will basically encompass more scope of the project for just in general terms.
Exactly the work we asked for.
Okay.
More scope
Okay.
and cost detail.
Okay. I think, Jeff?
I just wanted to follow up on that comment, and I think it's a great idea, but I don't want to put Gordon to the trouble, and I don't think the board needs to hear all the minutia and the detail. We all have it available to us to read. I would like to have broad overviews, and then if there's questions on a lot of the smaller categories, we stop and ask those questions, because they can get very lengthy at times. No fault of Gordon's, there's just a lot of material there, and I feel we have the opportunity to read all this stuff in advance anyway.
That's fine.
Okay.
Quick
So-
question.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that we're talking about the same thing. When I look at the minutes and I look at section 6.8, paragraph 2, it refers to the motion that I remember with the approximate cost, you remember, of $50,000 to $75,000. How does what you're discussing differ from that paragraph?
Well, that was the amount of money we were thinking of spending to prepare a more detailed cost estimate specifically on the maintenance items, for which there's a whole list. I was a little bit more concerned that when we said we're going to have school extensions built on Berthoud L and Ivy, what does that mean? You say an extension, is it 1 room, 5 rooms? Is it a cafeteria? No, it should be elaborated on. And in addition, when we say we're going to build a new school east of I-25, a K through 8, well, what is that for? How many classrooms? What's the capacity, et cetera? If we are going to go out for a bond, we need to define that. So that is the detail that should be continuously developed, and I want to see it start as soon as possible. That's what I had in mind. Is that making sense to you?
Yeah, and I understand now the differentiation between the two. So thanks
you.
for that clarification.
Thank you.
Dr. Crespo?
Just in general, I think it's important to understand that as we go through.
Yeah.
We want to make what we think. There developed. Got some language. In 20. We couldn't get.
Well, just real quickly, just so that there is confidence in these numbers, we've been looking at these things for almost a year and a half. And if you'll remember some numbers we had from 2016, certainly those numbers have gone up. But also built into all of this, and we've had direct conversations with Margaret and Gordon, certainly through back to master planning, as well as Kristen in operations. We've included some inflation factors. We've included some contingency factors. We have a number of things in there, so I feel fairly confident in those numbers right now. And I think as we move forward and get more specific, certainly we can do that. I guess I'm a little puzzled with the right now. What master planning came up with was 8 classrooms at Berthoud and 4 at each of those schools. Now, how we actually configure those and maybe add this or that or whatever as we look through the architectural planning may change a bit. But the actual square footages, and that's really where we get our numbers to start with. We have those nailed down very, very well, and again, we've built some other things into that to make sure there's plenty of room to have some flexibility there. But the thing we don't want to do is we don't want to get so specific that contractors are bidding against our specificity, because that's not what you want to do to get a competitive bid. So you have to be careful with that. So just all of that is a part of the whole mix in terms of our planning and what we've done to try to make this thing work as positively as it possibly can.
And before we get any further off the track, I'd like to remind us that we're still approving minutes from a previous meeting where we can't really change what we said, what we talked about. I agree, Dave, that, to add in a little bit more detail about, you want a little bit more scope of the project, but this other discussion really needs to be held as a different discussion item, and I'm totally willing to do that or have that be a discussion, but not as we do the minutes.
Of course.
Agreed?
Sure.
Okay. So I've got a motion and a second. I think I have a motion and a second on the table to approve the minutes with that one change. Wendy, call the roll, please.
Paul Banks.
Aye.
Pam Howard.
Aye.
Lori Visitor Ward.
Aye.
Barbara Cruz. Aye. Dave Levy.
Aye.
Mark Setter.
Aye.
Jeff Swanty.
Aye.
All right, thank you. So those minutes are approved with a 7-0 vote. Next up is public comment, public participation. Is there anyone signed up? Is there any? Joelle, is there anybody else who is intending to sign? Feel free. Go ahead and let's get you signed up, and we'll have you come up. Just go ahead and put your whatever.
And I'm going to read this statement while you're getting that
Pam, go
paperwork
ahead and
done.
read that. That's great.
Because the board wants to hear the viewpoint of the public, we have scheduled time during the regular board meetings for comments from the citizens. The board has set aside an unlimited time for public participation prior to the business portion of each meeting on the first and third Wednesday of the month. The time for each speaker is limited to 3 minutes, and each individual will only be recognized once. The board will not respond to comments or questions. Thanks.
And Dr. Banks will run the clock. Thanks. Oh, hang on just a second till we get the
okay,
list.
no problem.
We'll get
So
the
when
list. We'll get
when
the
it
clock
flashes yellow, you have 30 seconds left.
Okay,
And
no
then
pressure.
red is done.
Okay.
on. Give us just one more minute. And then we can. Right.
Okay. Oh, you can hear me okay. My name's Joelle Moran. I'm a parent of, I have 2 daughters who will both be at Bill Reed Middle School next year. I consider myself to be a very involved parent in our district. I've been a 100-hour volunteer for the past 4 to 5 years. I sit on the district Wellness Advisory Council, so I consider myself an informed parent. But today, actually yesterday, I just found out about these proposed boundary changes for my daughters for high school from Loveland High to Thompson Valley. I understand that these have been talked about before the board at 3 previous meetings. I have not been able to attend those. I have not heard about it. I have not been informed about it. I have not been sent any emails, no information about it. So I'm a little upset today about this. I think it's your job as our school board to inform parents and homeowners, community members, if you're going to make drastic changes like this. When you wanted to change school start times, you sent surveys, email after email. Everyone knew about it. Nobody in my neighborhood or in the downtown Loveland area knows that this is happening. And the people that I know are not happy about it. The thing I'm most upset about is that, we're not informed about this. If your mission statement, you talk about empowering students and parents, you're not empowering them if you're not informing them. And I know that you're taking action on this tonight, and I would urge you to either delay it and inform the people that live in this area that this could affect them. You could have sent an email home to all the parents at Bill Reed Middle School and Garfield Elementary School. None of that was done. So I don't feel like it's been very transparent. I know the Master Planning Committee has been talking about this, and it's been part of that, but the Master Planning Committee has changed. I heard Skip come to Garfield and talk about combining Truscott and Garfield. That went away. I had no idea that this was just going to happen overnight. So I would urge you to either vote against it or consider delaying a vote on this today, because I don't think the people that live in the affected areas were adequately informed about it. Thank you.
Next, we have Zachary Anderson.
I am Zach Anderson, and I also live downtown in the affected area, and I just found out about it 2 hours ago, and it wasn't published in the paper. I saw nothing in the paper about it. I feel like, it's like I'm going to echo Joelle's concerns. I have two children that are going to be, one who's in Bill Reed right now and one who's going to be starting Garfield in the fall, and I feel like it came up out of the blue. Traditionally, downtown school has been what, Bill Reed was Loveland High School, and, the traditional downtown school has always been Loveland High School, and that's the heart of downtown, the west side neighborhood where the boundary changes have taken place. And I understand it's an action item tonight, and I'm also going to ask that you either delay it so the public can know. I mean, it wouldn't have been hard to notify parents that are going to be affected by this through an email, through a letter home, because it's easy to find boundaries in the computer system. I'm sure for someone it's not that hard, but I feel like it came up as a big surprise. And so I urge you to either delay it or so that more people can find out about it, or vote no on it. Thank you.
That's it? Okay, thank you. So then that takes us to item 4.1, which is approval of the proposed approval of the proposed boundary changes. We've got on our desk here the maps. I believe they're also attached to board docs at this point. Dr. Crespo, that's you?
Yep, and I'll hand it over here to Skip in a second. Margaret
Okay.
Crespo, Chief Academic Officer. And you have copies of the maps as well as the agenda item. So this is coming to the board, has come in front of the board before. Boundary changes are done on a regular basis, brought to the board based on what the needs are in the district. Over the last 18 months, we've been observing and reviewing what the growth looks like. We have to have enough seats in a geographical location for our students, and that's part of the board policy. So that leads us to come here this evening to have a final conversation around what that looks like for the 1920 school year. We're just aligning to what the board policy looks like. Skip.
Questions? Dave?
I'm very much in favor of these board changes, but I am concerned about, did we inform the parents? Is it standard procedure that we would send an email to parents, let them know we're proposing these changes, solicit public comment? What's our normal procedure on that?
Normally, we would not notify anybody other than the normal board procedure until after action was taken, and then everybody would be notified at that point.
Is there any, if we delay the action to allow public comment, would that be a problem?
So my recommendation would be that you follow the policy. The reason that we do boundaries is to have enough, we're statutorily required to have enough seats for those students in resident area district. Certainly, the board can make a decision to do what that looks like. We are a choice district, so what we're trying to do, as the charges that were given to us by MPC from the board, were to look at those boundary conversations, which we look at anyway every year. So in addition to doing that, we answered those questions, looked at those boundary conversations, and the impact is up to the board. It's just based on the policy.
And this wouldn't take effect until the 1920
1920
school year? Okay, I just wanted to clarify. Paul?
It goes back to just the relation of growth and where we are and what that looks like, and having those available seats for those schools based on those attendance areas.
Yes, as I said.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
Paul, you looked like you had your hand up, no?
Just same thoughts that Dave have, that I can see the need for it, why we need to do it, but making sure the public's informed and they have an opportunity to share what they need to share. And perhaps we need to look at how we need to change the process to allow that to happen.
Can you help me refresh my memory a little bit? We had talked about how this would affect individuals who live in those areas, and that we would have a grandfather clause.
For those students that are already there, yes, we usually roll it up. Typically, the student that starts there ends, can continue through that process. We do have open enrollment with options for siblings. We try to honor that family component. We have choice. It's really about just having the level of resident seats, and the impact is elementary, middle, and high right now. And if you remember, at three meetings ago, we had a conversation around the impact for high school, and being that the other buildings, kind of the growth was a little bit different, but at one time, that boundary existed where we're asking to put it back prior to Mountain View. And what we're feeling is that impact on that high school boundary and what that means long-term for that building, as well as the capacity in that residential area.
So 34 was at one point the boundary,
Yes,
and then it got changed?
yes,
for Mountain
prior
View.
to the Mountain View
Right, okay.
construction.
Okay.
So south is, or 34 was Thompson Valley for
Yes.
decades, and then Mountain View started, and then that's when it changed.
Yes.
Around, what, the year 2000 or so?
What year was Mountain View? 2001.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for the history, Jeff. Sorry.
Is there anything that would have legally stopped us from getting in touch with the parents beforehand? I'm not interested in who's at fault or anything like
No,
that
right.
at this point. What I'm concerned about, we have two parents here tonight who just heard about it, and how many parents might have been here if they had known this was going on. If there's any way we can put this off, I would certainly want to put it off to give parents the chance to come in here. And I certainly agree with this gentleman who was telling us about that neighborhood. And I realize this is what happens when boundaries change, but historically, downtown has gone to Loveland High. There's a lot of families, second, third generation. I mean, people have lived there a long, long time. And I would really like to hear from other parents on this.
Sure, and you certainly can do that as a board. I will share that we did have community forums, 6 of them, related to all of the areas, boundaries, school closure, bond mill conversation. And just for context, right, it is what it is. And previously, in every boundary conversation that we have every single year at this time, we bring it to the board. If the board would choose to do something else, then certainly we would make that happen.
And on those forums, did we advise parents that we were looking at changing boundaries? Was the public aware of this, I guess, is my big concern.
Yes, so at those 6 meetings, those 3 questions came up: boundaries, school closures, value statements related to community conversation, and what they were looking for in a bond mill.
It came up at the meetings, but
Yes.
beforehand, did the public know that this was going to be part of the conversation?
At those meetings?
Only
Yes.
based at the agenda, right, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
I feel like I have to weigh in here. It's my neighborhood, it's my schools, it affects my own child, actually. I'm not opposed to it necessarily. I have a hard time separating out what I know, because I've been involved in this process for a year, and what I would have known had I just been in the situation of the parents that spoke tonight. If I was a parent just going about my daily business and didn't know what I know. I don't necessarily see any real harm in delaying, since it's going to be another year. I don't know that that necessarily would change anything. I don't really know. I don't know that, sometimes in a delay in having discussions, sometimes another idea can emerge.
The only suggestion that I would make is, and to the board, is that I would not push it off much further than just in the next couple of meetings, because the impact, it takes a year,
Here to get it taken.
literally a year, to make this transition if it's decided to do that.
So we could make it an action item on June 20th. And that would give enough time for the parents.
I would think we'd have to postpone until after that. I mean, I'm one who believes the collective wisdom of the community is greater than anybody else's, including the boards. And I think out of courtesy, we should wait till school resumes, send out an email to all affected. I know it's delaying things, but I think that's the appropriate action to take. To August, I think it is the appropriate action to take.
Will that take a
And,
motion?
In a second, I'll call for motion in a second. I did have one
Okay.
more sort of procedural question. Do we want to, and board, maybe this is for us to answer, or maybe it's for staff to answer, but do we want to separate these out, or do we want to keep them as one, an all or none? All these boundaries at one time, or do we want to consider them? It looks like there's 4 technically. So do we want to consider them one by one? I don't necessarily think we do, but I just want to throw that out there before we make any other, I don't want to have to make a decision and unmake that decision. Jeff?
If you're asking us to weigh in, I'd say let's vote on them all at a later
packet.
date. Yeah, give everybody a chance.
And aren't they somewhat interrelated in the sense that you are from an elementary school, you go to a middle school, from that middle school, you go to that high school, so you know.
They are related. The bigger concern would be the elementary boundaries, moving those based on the growth right now at Carey Martin and BF Kitchen, and relieving the Berthoud pressure. So whatever the board decides to do is great, but just know that elementary boundary has a significantly greater impact than some of the other conversations that you may have.
But that boundary would go in effect in the school year 2019-20.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay,
But-
now, if there's no more questions, we can have a motion.
Yeah,
Looks
just
like
gonna
Paul's ready
say,
to make one.
I would move that we delay voting on this particular item until we've had a chance to educate our community a little bit more and give them a chance to weigh in and then decide on this after that.
And I would say that education should be an email to each parent. Tell them, informing them that. Is that appropriate, an email to each parent? Or-
Sure.
That's appropriate, but I don't know that it's appropriate on the motion.
Yeah, I
Because
would
he's
just-
making a motion,
Yeah.
and I
Don't add
I
on
want
to it.
one, I just want one motion at a time, that's
Well,
all.
I mean, I would
Yeah, so just-
suggest that we add to the
So
motion.
just to keep the motion simple, I move that we delay voting on this particular issue until a further meeting when we're able to hear from the community more.
Second.
Okay, so what I've got is delay voting until a later date, no date specified in that, until we've had a chance to hear more from the community. Does that sum it up? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. As I just stated, is there any further discussion? Okay, Wendy, if you'd call the roll, please.
Hold on.
Quick question,
Oh,
I'm
wait,
sorry.
sorry.
Dr. Crespo, as far as school board policy, do you see any conflict of interest here?
That's what I just asked Skip. No, we'll go back and reread, because typically we just make the boundary change based on growth and needs. So I'll go back and check, but we don't think so.
But if I could add to your comment, I was going to make another motion later on. We should revisit our policy. I think it should be included in the policy, that we make a specific.
So something like a public hearing?
Yeah, we
on
make
it, or a
yeah,
public
right,
notice?
Public hearing and public notice, whatever it has to be.
Okay.
Just review the policy, and we'll discuss it at that time.
When was the last time we did a boundary change?
Every year.
But we actually make them, or we talk about it?
2007 was the last large one, but yes,
Okay.
we make
So,
moves all the
yeah,
time.
Yeah. I know we approached, but I didn't know for sure where it impacted, and, okay, thank you.
Bob, don't worry, you'll still be part of the school district.
And I do know personally on this one that when we bought our house in 1994, the house was in Thompson Valley School District. And then when my child started school in, I think, 2001, it had changed somewhere in there. So, there have been changes. Okay. So we are now, call the roll on that, Wendy, please.
Paul Banks,
Aye.
Pam Howard,
Aye.
Lori Visitor Ward,
Aye.
Barbara Cruz,
Aye.
Dave Levy,
Aye.
Mark Setter,
Aye.
Jeff Swanty.
Aye.
All right,
Thank you.
that one passes 7-0, thank you. And so we will delay that until question, or, okay.
No,
Okay.
I have
Okay.
a motion to make.
On this,
Well, it's just that we ask staff to revisit the board policy to include that it requires a public hearing before we change boundaries. So we just include that in standard operating procedure.
okay, so it's been moved that we ask staff
Yeah.
to consider including in the policy, is there a policy I can reference real quick here? A letter? No?
Well, I think I asking staff to discuss it with the board, present their recommendation. But I
Okay.
think it's just
So,
to avoid this
basically,
again.
basically,
motion
we'd
is
like
just-
them to study that policy at this time
And present,
and present some potential changes.
Suggestion to us.
Okay. So that's what we've got. We've got that
Second.
motion. Second. Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we ask staff to review and study the policy around boundary changes to include potential items around community engagement. I got a motion and a second, and is there any further discussion? Okay. Wendy, if you call the roll on that, please.
Paul Banks,
Aye.
Pam Howard,
Aye.
Lori Vistor Ward,
Aye.
Barbara Cruz,
Aye.
Dave Levy,
aye.
Mark Setter,
Aye.
Jeff Swanty.
Aye.
Okay, and that passes unanimously as well. Thank you. All right, now we are moving on to, correct me if I'm wrong, somebody, but I think we are now on discussion items, correct? Correct. Okay. Item 6.1, we have a couple of things that relate to early childhood. So 6.1 is a cost of living adjustment for Head Start. We have Lamb Caro and Anne Marie's on deck, I guess.
Good evening, Madam President, Dr. Chair, and members of the board. Lamb Caro, Early Childhood Administrator. The first item in front of you is the cost of living adjustment offered by Head Start this year. And I sent the memo indicating that I actually need an approval before the June 18th date because the grant must be submitted by that time. And so if you've had a chance to look at it, it's $31,900 or $692, which would be applied to the salaries for the upcoming school year. And that's just specifically for salaries, and that's how the money can only be spent.
This is a discussion item, but you say you need action by the board?
Yeah, because I included the grant proposal in the docs with the board documents.
Are you actually asking us to vote on it?
So we'll have to
Yeah.
move it to action. I
Because the-
missed that, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because the turnaround time was less than
Yeah.
a month, yeah.
That's often how,
Yeah,
That's fine.
unfortunately, that's often how the federal grant
Yeah.
things work.
I
It's
move-
all of a sudden.
I move we move it to an action item.
Second. It's been moved and seconded to move the Head Start funding increase application for the COLA to an action item. Discussion? Wendy, call the roll, please.
Paul Banks,
Aye.
Pam Howard.
Aye.
Lori Vistor Ward.
Aye.
Barbara Cruz.
Aye.
Dave Levy.
Aye.
Mark Setter,
Aye.
Jeff Swanty.
Aye.
Okay, so that's been moved to discussion on a 7-0 vote.
Action.
I'm sorry, move to action. Thank you. On a 7-0 vote. And I will then entertain a motion to approve, sorry, the COLA request, and then we can have discussion after that.
I so move.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the cost of living adjustment request for fiscal year 2018 for the Head Start Supplemental Funding Grant. Is there any further discussion? Paul, or Mark?
I might have a pair of questions for you. First question is, where does the grant come from? It is a federal grant?
It's a federal grant.
Okay.
Correct.
As part of that question, I noticed that there was a non-federal match requirement. Could you go into a little more detail on that?
No, but I can get that information for you. I only got that information, or we started talking about it recently, and so we're putting the rest of the grant together this coming Tuesday, and I'd be happy to share it once we have that completed. Oh, the non-federal match is from us.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is this,
Our general fund,
Is that?
our general fund.
Yeah.
okay, and is this any different from prior years?
It's more than it was last year. Last year was only $17,000. This year's
Okay.
a
So
little
we're
bit more.
focusing on the increase?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And then the last question I had is in regards to the table on page 1. It has a dollar value for the Head Start COLA, and then the next 3 columns, or the next 3 rows are blank. And could you just give me a little bit of background on those 3
I'm
rows?
gonna just need to open this up real quick. Because we don't have early Head Start is why those are blank. We do not have early Head Start in our program. So that's why it's blank.
Okay.
So there's Head Start, and then there's Early Head Start. The Poudre School District is the grantee for the Early Head Start program.
So it doesn't apply to us, is that clear?
Yeah, makes sense.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. Before I take the vote, can I have you, I know I get these as the chair, but is it possible to have Barb as the Family Pie liaison to be included in these mailings as well?
Sure.
I mean, it was clean and neat when I was both.
Yeah, yeah.
But
I did
since
give
I'm no
her,
longer-
I gave
got
her a
it.
copy earlier.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
Okay. But I mean, through Head Start, can
Sure.
they do that?
Oh,
Will
I
they
can make
do
that
that?
request. Yeah.
Sure, let's ask
Okay.
them that way.
Yeah.
Then I won't have to feel
Sure. Yeah.
like I've left something
I will
off.
do that
Okay.
request.
All right. Jeff, question or comment?
Question, I guess, the matching piece we're being asked to approve. This is no surprise. Wouldn't this have been in the budget?
From the
Matching piece.
The matching
Yeah.
part that
Well,
the
we-
district's being asked
yeah.
to come up with on the grant?
And usually we match in lots of different ways, through transportation, the use of the facilities, salaries for some people in the program. So we match dollar to dollar or what we need to contribute to the grant.
We're not having to come up with money
No,
that we thought we weren't going to have to come
We
up
do
with?
not, no.
Okay,
No.
thank you.
Yeah, it's cost neutral.
Anything further? Okay, Wendy, if you'd call the roll on that, please.
Paul Banks.
Aye.
Pam Howard.
Aye.
Lori Visitor Ward.
Aye.
Barbara Cruz.
Aye.
Dave Levy.
Aye.
Mark Setter.
Aye.
Jeff Swanty.
Aye.
Okay, so we've approved 7-0 the Head Start fiscal year 2018 cost of living adjustment. That takes us to item 6.2, early childhood community needs assessment updates and recommendation. Lamb.
So every year, we're required to update the community needs assessment for our program, and we find certain things that, or we get information periodically from different sources. And one of them is from the Kids Campaign, so generally that's where we get a lot of our information. But then there are other pieces that don't come out from sometimes for 3 years and up to 5. So the pieces that are in the community needs assessment this year are things that we've seen before and things that we address in the early childhood program. And so one of them is the lack of affordable housing. So we're finding that we have a lot of parents that can't afford to live here. So our primary goal is to make recommendations and connect parents to their resources in the community. So that could be through Larimer County 211, could be through the House and Neighborly Services, and so on. So as a result of the lack of affordable housing, our role, we feel, is that we continue to connect people with resources and support any initiatives that come up to make housing more affordable to the community. The second piece is a social emotional behavior support. This year we joined LEAP of Larimer County, and that offers support to community partners in Larimer County and beyond our community. And so we not only access resources, but we also share resources with different groups from across the county. So this coming fall, we're going to actually, for our program specifically, we're implementing a parent curriculum that matches our programming, and that is called Pyramid for Parents, and that fits in with the Positive Behavior Intervention Supports Program. And then we'll also continue to work with the LEAP Coalition for the upcoming school year. And then finally, one of the things that we do track is the BMI of our students in Head Start. And the trend that we've noticed is that BMI continues to increase with our students. And so we're trying to make some changes with how we provide information to our parents. So this upcoming school year, there's 2 things that we're going to do. We're going to continue focusing on the programs that we do have in our program. I Am Moving, I Am Learning, and then the Head Start program, Healthy Harvest for Kids. But then the other piece is implementing a parent workshop where they will come and they will learn about how to cook foods at home that are more healthy, and then expose them to different kinds of foods that will promote a more healthy lifestyle at home.
Questions, board? Are we going to be asked to approve this
The
next
recommendations from
in-
this.
At the next
yeah,
meeting?
correct.
Questions? All right. Thanks, Lamb. Next is the Head Start, item 6.3, Head Start grant.
So this is what's the actions we'll be taking in the upcoming school year for 2018 and 2019. In the memo I've given to you, I shared with you the progress that we had this year, and based on that progress, what we're going to be working on for the upcoming school year. And so if you look, it's a pretty comprehensive look at our program that covers health and safety, eligibility, recruitment, selection, enrollment, and attendance, education, sorry, Pam, I meant partnering with families and community
Very
engagement.
Freudian, I think.
Fiscal management and transportation. And then our school readiness goals of social emotional health, literacy, and math.
Questions, board? And is there an action required on this next time?
Yep.
Okay. All right.
Should we have it on the consent calendar?
Yeah, I think it will be, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it will be on the consent.
And I might have questions now.
Okay.
I have another question.
Versus next. Just curiosity of on the math program, it's a new adoption of the math programs. Do we have anything in place where you connect with the kindergarten teachers to give you feedback to help inform what you're going to do next year on that? Or
Well, we're hoping that with the new late start this year, that we'll be able to do some of that work. We're starting the initial phasing of our planning stages for what that's going to look like on those Wednesdays. We did some work last year in terms of literacy and practices in the classroom, but now we're working towards the other piece. For early childhood, there's not a defined math program, but we do use math practices from the Kids Play Math program.
and anything you can tell us on the literacy, because I'm looking at your literacy results. We missed our targets by quite a bit. Adjusting the targets, I mean, anything that would help us understand why we came in where we did.
Yeah, so when we looked at our doing the root cause analysis of our data, we went back and determined the things that we could focus on, and so we're going to refocus on some literacy practices in the classroom, particularly around with small group learning and with dialogic reading. So for next year's plans, we're going to focus on those two things as part of our TENS week and then throughout the school year.
I didn't know if it was the way it was being tested that we missed. I mean,
Yeah, we use gold. So one of the other things that we talked about at the end of this year also is that every teacher has to be, they have to go through a calibration training and be certified to give gold. But then the next part is even when we look at our analysis of how we score within the objectives, sometimes we have some variation in scoring. So we're going to come back and recalibrate with the staff about what scoring is for particular objectives.
thanks.
Mhm.
Thanks, Liam.
Can I mention one other thing?
Yep.
Anyway.
So there's one other thing that we're going to be working on in the fall is with the elementary principals is a P3 needs assessment. And so we'll be looking at all of the different components for transitioning from kindergarten, from early childhood to kindergarten, and then also all the way to just the literacy practices from EC through 3. So that's just something that we're starting as well.
Thank you.
You know, if anything comes up in the meantime, as read over this again, we can ask Lamb, and
Yes.
and he'd
Anytime.
be happy to.
Yes, you do.
We have family pie on Monday, so if something pops up, let me know.
All right. That takes care of 6.3. We are now on to 6.4, early childhood classroom relocation from High Plains K-8 to Monroe Elementary School. And is that also yours, Lamb? Or is Dr. Crespo going to take that one? All right.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. Scheer, Margaret Crespo. I am here to answer any questions that you may have related to moving the early childhood from High Plains.
The entire early childhood or one classroom?
No, just one class.
One of two classrooms.
Yes.
The only thing I wondered about is it says temporarily. Does that mean, is it just,
Well, we're hoping that it's temporary.
Oh,
Everything
okay.
we do is temporary.
okay. Change, okay.
Well, and I know from serving on was Early Childhood Policy Council before it was Family Pie, but that happens occasionally because it just does, and it's not like when you're dealing with the K-5, it's one grade of kids. They're there for a year, and they're not there for a long period of time, so the impact is And so the reason for this is
High Plains
space
is
needs
full.
at High Plains, so we're going to have more kindergartners? Is that kind of the
Yep,
take?
so we're actually a 2-round school, and we'll be moving to 1 full-time kinder, 2.5 kinder, 2 kinder,
kinders?
half-time, thank you.
So like one
1
morning and one
full-time
afternoon?
kinder. I'm sorry.
One morning and one afternoon?
And then 3 first grade, 2 second grade, 2 third, 2 fourth. Those numbers are a little high right now, so there'll be some impact there. 2 fifth. And we're looking at possibly needing additional space for kinder and 4th grade, in addition to what we're gaining by moving this.
Are you going to make this effective this August?
Yes.
Yes, you should. Well, you know what we're saying is High Plains is a success story. That's what we're really defining, and we have to act accordingly.
And we have a number of buildings that are full and are starting to feel the pressure.
Dr. Scheer, did you have a comment or question?
Nothing other than the fact that as you anticipate this, it's going to be more of this. I don't think it's temporary. I think it's going to, there's going to be some other interesting decisions down the road, because if you drive out in that area, of course I live out in that area, there's another development to the north of High Plains right now that is taking off, and price points for the homes and all that, they've shifted those a little bit so that they're encouraging more probably what I would call people with families, that kind of thing. So I think the pressure on High Plains is going to continue in terms of, especially at the elementary level.
Some of you were at the MPC conversation where that area came out and had a conversation about the growth and what that looks like, and it'll be significant for a long time.
And is this an information-only item? We don't need to approve this?
Nope, there's just an information.
Any further questions? All right.
Oh, yeah.
Mark?
How are we communicating with the community?
Losing my mind.
Yeah, so the benefit is that because early childhood has a very close-knit group, they're communicating out to where those families are. Many of those students are new, so they don't really know that they're going or not going to an environment. It's based on placement. So yes, we are communicating.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Item 6.5, New Vision Charter School, New Vision Charter School bond transaction. And Gordon.
Madam President, Dr. Scheer, members of the board, I'm Gordon Jones, Chief Financial Officer for the district. I'd like to invite to the podium Tim Bishop and I'll get it, Rick Daly, sorry, from New Vision Charter School to discuss their proposed, to give a brief description and answer any board's questions on the bond initiative planned by New Vision.
Evening.
Thank you, gentlemen.
So, not sure who knows what. I'm Tim Bishop, principal at New Vision. Rick Daly, board president, and we're very happy to be here. I did notice the camera though catches my bald spot, so if we could catch that somewhere else, that'd be good. We at New Vision are growing, as is the rest of the district in students, and we have a very robust wait list right now of depends upon the time of year, depends on what number I give you. So we are maxed out at our capacity, as we have been for a little bit of time. And so our board, this is my second year there. I came from a couple different public schools, my last one down in Longmont, Sant Brain Valley School District. And they gave me the charge of looking at our footprint and how to expand our footprint when I arrived, and is it even possible? So for the last 2 years, we've been looking at, is it financially feasible, and does it make sense to us as a school? So we have been working with a number of entities, and we did find some land that we are looking to close on. And this is obviously private bond that we're spending, not anything else at this point. And it is behind the new county building on Denver and First. There's 10 acres of land there. And we are looking at building a grades 3 through 8 school there, keeping our K2 where it currently is because we own the building. So until we're able to sell that building or decide whatever the board decides to do with that building, it's not on the market right now or anything like that. We're going to remain a K-8, but just 2 campuses there, very, very close proximity to each other. We are looking at slow growth. So what that means in our mind is K through 2. We currently have 2 rounds of K through 2. We will be adding 2 rounds of K through 2 starting in the 1920 school year. So we're breaking ground this September, and we'll let you know when that is. And the building is promised to be on schedule, be completed by July of 2019, and we would then move in August of 2019. So we'll be moving 3 through 8 over, increasing rounds to 4 for our K through 2, and for our grades 6, we'll be increasing from 2 to 4. It may be a 5, 6. We're kind of debating on numbers where we stand right now. Our largest wait lists are K through 2 and grades 5 and 6. So we'll wait on that to determine what makes the most sense for our school at that point in time. And then we'll add, as we move up, each grade up. So grades 2 to become 3, the next year 3 to 4. So within about 3 years, then we'll be finally totally built out. So 1920, 2021, 21, 22. And the architects are designing a K2 on the same campus for us as far as plans, but at this point we're not breaking ground on the K2 portion of the new campus. That will just remain at the current building site. Questions on funding or what your questions might be, but that's our overall plan, and it has been quite a process for our school to and our board. And I give Rick Daly, fortunately, he has a great investment mind and understands this has been quite a process. But we are to close on June 12th, and then move forward with this project starting in September.
Thank you.
So-
Assuming board members are going to have some questions, so we'll start down here.
Yeah. So if I understand the plans correctly, will this effectively double your student capacity?
Yes. Within 3 years, we'll be doubling our size.
And then depending on what you choose to do with the existing building, that could end up potentially being more capacity.
Correct.
Jeff?
You guys have had a great relationship with the Boys and Girls Club, and I'm just wondering what's going to happen when you leave that facility.
Well, right now it's not, the facility's not in the market, so our relationship is still going to remain at this point in time. We're not looking at changing that relationship. 5 years from now, or whenever the time may be, we'll have to re-investigate or decide what's best for us. But up to that point, we are staying a presence on that campus.
Are you financially subsidizing them right now with various programs that you're jointly doing, or?
No, we lease part of the building during the day, time hours, and then they take it over at 3:30. So as far as the gym and the cafeteria and the kitchen area. So we obviously need those for our K2 that will remain there.
But will have a financial impact on them?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Did you not understand when I said we're staying there? K2 is staying there?
Yeah.
Okay, just making sure you understand that.
But not long-term, right? That's short-term?
We are planning at this point for the next 3 years. That's all. That's all I
Okay,
can
I'm
do.
looking long-term.
Yeah.
Dave?
Wanted to mention that Rick sent me an email maybe a couple of months ago, we had a meeting over a cup of coffee for a couple of hours, and Rick, I want to thank you for all your input and suggestions.
To share?
Apology to Rick. The day you communicated with me, I was being hauled into surgery to have my knee operated on, so I was busy trying to send this stuff off to other people. So I hope that the communications didn't get garbled that day, because they were just about ready to put me out.
We got everything we needed.
Okay,
Very much.
thank you.
Further questions? No? All right.
Thanks for all your support.
Thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
gentlemen.
Good luck.
Appreciate it.
Good luck.
6.6 is compliance with House Bill 17-1375, distributing mill levy override revenue to charter schools. Gordon.
Madam President, Dr. Scheer, members of the board, Gordon Jones, Chief Financial Officer for the district for the next several agenda items.
And then you're not going to be our chief financial officer anymore?
For the next several agenda items, and then it will be the board's, actually, it will be Dr. Scheer's discretion, I'm
Okay.
sorry. This discussion item for the board's consideration is legislation that was passed in the 2017 legislative session, thus the House Bill 17-1375. This has to do with sharing of mill levy revenue, mill levy override revenues with schools in the district, including charter schools. So with the board memo that was added admittedly late, I've tried to explain what that process is and give some details around that. We currently have legal counsel working on adopting a plan for what, per the legislation, of what that sharing could look like. So just as a point of oversight or review or update for the board, a district that has charter schools and innovation schools within its boundaries that have been authorized is required by this legislation to do one of two things. Either create a plan to share mill levy override revenues with those schools, or absent a plan, to allocate on a per pupil basis 95% of the mill levy override dollars that are collected each year by the school district. So the recommendation of staff and administration at this point, pending legal confirmation, which I'm confident is coming, they're drafting the plan right now, would be to create that plan. The plan has to be posted on this district's website by July 1st of 2018, so this coming July. The funding or the allocation of those funds would not come into play until the 1920 school year. So there's 1 year in between. The board will recall that there's an item on the budget right now that's titled Incremental Funding to Charter Schools in the amount of about $450,000 combined for the two charter schools that we have in the district. The methodology that was used at that time, 3 years ago, when that was first instituted and put into the budget by the board, is the same methodology that is called for in the legislation. The difference is what we're doing, what the district is doing right now, is funding that $450,000 from general fund reserves. This legislation specifically calls for that funding to come from mill levy override revenues. However, it's the belief that the calculations, once specific items are removed from those mill levy overrides, for instance, the ballot language that would call for the staffing of 54 positions that were scheduled for elimination. That's something that's very specific, that's called for in the ballot language, that would be excluded from the the 14,040,000 that's currently in place. Items like that would be reduced or removed from that total, and then the remaining amount allocated on a pro rata basis across all students in the district. So the specific language that's in the legislation that pertains to that is subject to statutory limits or requirements that apply to specific mill levy authorizations and any purposes specifically approved by voters in approving additional mill levy revenue. So it's those specific purposes that the voters have called for that would be removed from the $14 million total figure, with the remaining balance then allocated on a per pupil basis amongst all the students in the district. There is some consideration for what that means for innovation schools. The legislation does refer to innovation schools, if they would be included at some level as well, and that's something that legal is looking at this point as well.
I just want to make sure I understand this. The board has to vote on this proposal that's now being drafted. Is that correct?
That is correct. The board.
And so we're going to see it on the same day we're going to vote on it, or, I mean, we have discussion on it on the same day we have to vote on it, because that's to be posted July 1st.
That is correct.
Okay, so basically, you're telling us that, just jumping ahead, you expect the policy that that you, staff, and legal are developing is going to continue in effect what funds the, this district is sharing with the, charter schools.
In essence, that's the estimate for the calculation at this point. Yes, one item would replace the other.
Yeah, exactly.
If I may,
Dr. Shear?
I'd like to think of this meeting being our information item to you before we bring it to you for action, excuse me, on the 20th. And we've been looking at this for quite a while, and quite frankly, patting staff on the back for the methodology we applied 3 years ago, because that really reflected what we thought was already in the law and what Tabor expects and all that. So we're very consistent with that distribution right now, even though we're not required to do it. And so it shouldn't have any more impact than it already has. There was impact, $450,000 plus, but at least it's very consistent with the way the law was written. And I would imagine that maybe, just maybe, somebody used us as a template, since they were involved legally with us and very much involved with charter school legislation when that was developed. So, for what it's worth.
So we're in a good place on this, basically.
Yes.
Questions? So can I request that if legal has it far enough ahead of time, that even if it's before the agenda for the next
to you.
meeting, could we see it to
Get it to you
review
next week, hopefully.
Because you know how we are with legal stuff, we always have extra questions, and so it might be nice if we got them, if we gave you the courtesy of asking them ahead of time. so that-
Absolutely.
Hopefully, that will be the case, that legal can deliver that on a timely basis. They are working with various other districts on this
course they are.
very same initiative.
The whole state.
For
to
July 1st.
Craft a
The whole state is in
plan
the same
for any district that has charter schools. Of the 178 districts in the state, I believe there are approximately, and please don't hold me to this number, 50 to 55 districts that have charter affiliations within their district. So they are working on this with the plan of having these adopted for the various districts at the same time that the 2018-19 budget is adopted, even though the funding mechanism does not go in place for this until the 2019-2020 school year.
Okay. Thank you. Next up is item 6. Oh, and I meant to mention this ahead of time, but I don't know that it's going to make any difference. There's a technical requirement for us to have a public hearing on the budget, and so once Gordon has finished presenting the budget, this is the formal budget presentation for the 18-19 proposed budget. We'll have a public hearing, and if any members of the public are here and wish to speak, they may. But I will call that out again at that time. So 6.7.
I will, with Madam President's permission, excuse myself from introductions after each of these, or for each of these 8 agenda items. The proposed 18-19 district budget, there's nothing that has changed in this from the last 2 or 3 versions that the district has seen. If I could just point out a couple things. Last week, I did conduct budget community forums, one in Berthoud and one in the boardroom here on back-to-back nights on Wednesday and Thursday. There was, at the Berthoud event, there was 1 Board of Education member as well as 2 community members. And for the presentation that was done in the boardroom here the next night, there were 2 Board of Education members and 5 community members. I will say, of those, although sparse community numbers that were in attendance, I welcomed their presence to be more educated on school finance and the budgeting process of Thompson School District. And I had questions afterwards from several of those members, questions and just an appreciation for having the chance in a much less formal setting to be able to ask questions about the budget. So those budget community forums did take place. The preliminary budget was presented to the board at the last meeting in May, which met a statutory requirement, meaning that it had to be presented within 1 month of the end of that current fiscal year. This agenda item satisfies the last remaining, almost all of the remaining requirements, the last being formal adoption of the budget, hopefully at the June 20th meeting, which is before the end of the current fiscal year. So this is really just a matter of making sure we're meeting statutory requirements. So a couple items that I will point out in a slide deck very briefly. This is posted on board docs. It's also posted under the financial transparency section of the district website. Again, information that the board has seen before, so I'm not going to belabor the point on all of these slides. From a funded pupil count to a revenue perspective, this slide just shows graphically where the revenue comes from for the district, for the board's review and the community's review. Obviously, with the largest portion of that being the School Finance Act. The FTE costs that we have, salaries and benefits. The non-FTE costs from a high level. And at the board's request from the last meeting, I've prepared 2 slides here that show the top 10 increases and the top 10 decreases in the non-FTE categories. So I'll give the board a second to look through those and be glad to answer any questions there may be. These are items that should be similar to the board, especially from the increase standpoint. We've talked about the significant increase in out-of-district special education placements. The department budget for learning services is increased, but I will point out that is primarily a reclass. In fact, it's more than that number is reclass from other line items that we'll see on the next slide, which are decreases. So in net, the department budget for learning services actually decreased a bit. Several of these are reclass items from where they were reported in the budget or recorded in the budget for 17-18 as compared to 18-19. Any questions that the board may have on those top 10 increase items from a non-FTE standpoint?
I guess I have questions on the decrease, so whenever we're ready for decrease questions.
Just so happens we are now ready for the top 10 decreases in the non-FTE items.
Amazing.
I'll give the board a second to look through those items. See some of these that are reclasses. So the first item, the curriculum, the one-time $385,000 decrease is now in that learning services department budget. So it's rolled up into that department budget rather than as a standalone item. The fourth item down, the professional development, is also in learning services department budget. So those 2 items combined are actually a bigger decrease than the net increase that we had, so an overall decrease in the budget for that particular department. Just a couple other items that I'll mention there. Looking at the Front Range Community College program, $72,000 less. That is the career pathways reduction through Front Range. There are 2 programs that were removed as we work in conjunction with Poudre School District with Front Range and other districts on offerings that they have. There are 2 programs that were removed based on the interest in those programs, the attendance, and quite honestly, a cost reduction measure by Poudre School District that they were looking to save some dollars, and this is one of the areas. One of those is the wildlife and forestry program, and the other is landscape architecture that will not be part of the Front Range Community College curriculum available to Thompson students. The next to the last item, Career Center support. I want to clarify that. It was a one-time ask in 17-18, but it's been, again, reclassed. That number for the Career Center support, that $38,000, is now part of the secondary department budget. So it has not been eliminated from the budget. It is now rolled up into the secondary department budget. Other questions on decreases?
Questions?
You read my mind because my two big concerns were Front Range Community College Program and then also the Career Center. So I'm relieved to hear the Career Center is still going strong and just kind of reclassified, as you said. And then, so for the Front Range, the programs, you said it was landscape architecture and wildlife.
Wildlife and forestry.
So now if any of our students in Thompson School District want to pursue career pathways in those,
Not be available through Front Range.
Front Range, okay, all right. So
But
it's
Front Range still offers them, so they could do them after.
Okay.
It's not part of the concurrent.
Do it as their concurrent instead of as their pathway.
okay.
Oh, okay.
It's really just based on more.
Okay.
Thank you.
I figured we'd be turning to you, Dr. Crespo, so, all right, thanks for that information.
Other questions? Dave? No?
I just had two comments. I attended both meetings. One, I think the public's best, most satisfaction was when Gordon demonstrated to them how much of our budget actually stays in the classroom. They were very satisfied when they saw over 90% of the budget stays in the classroom. So that was number one. And number two, Gordon asked, allowed some time to say, how could I improve my presentation, et cetera. And everyone was very satisfied with his presentation. They mentioned specific things they were satisfied with. So very good job, Gordon. I'll hammer you in a few minutes.
I was just going to ask if there was like one takeaway from those forums, if there was like one overriding thing that people were concerned. I know there wasn't huge numbers of people, but one thing that people were concerned about, or was it just?
Not particularly from my perspective. The two gentlemen that I talked to, one in Berthoud and one that attended the forum here, the fact that was most compelling to me is they were community members that did not have students in the school district. So they were community members that were taking an interest to educate themselves on school finance and the budget process that the school district goes through. And the most encouraging part of that was that they both mentioned to me that they were going to take this information back to their neighbors, friends that they have in other districts, that they maybe have been hearing conflicting messages from what the presentation that was presented showed them. So it's encouraging to me that there are people out in the community that are interested and will give of their time to learn a bit more about the process.
It's promising.
I think one thing I was thinking of, and I don't know what these bullet points would be, but it seems like a lot of them want to leave saying, okay, this makes sense to me, made some great points, we like the bucket never full. And you can see them discussing, trying to process, okay, what are the 2 or 3 points now I'm going to take away and go back and talk about? So I don't know if there's a way to add at the end, like a summary page. Here's a 3 or 4 points, so they can actually walk away with that rather than them still struggling with it. But again, I thought the response was great. They appreciate the way you explain it to them in more layman terms, and they all left saying, okay, I do have some talking points. So I think that was good.
One of the gentlemen was specifically asked by his community to actually attend because they felt he had a better understanding of finance. So, I mean, that was wonderful. People want to know, and they want to, they want to be digested to. So it's wonderful.
They don't all want to comment about it.
I envision the day when tickets will have to be sold.
That's next year. Okay.
One other,
Is that
a couple
revenue line we're going to have?
As Mr. Levy mentioned, this is the slide that shows by program code, which is what the Colorado Department of Education requires us to do from a chart of accounts perspective. So when you take out 3 areas here, central support up at the top, which is 3.8%, general admin, which is 0.6%, and business services, which is 1.6%, those combined total 6%. Meaning 94% of the expenditures of the district go into all of the other program codes, which involve getting kids to school, educating them while they're there, maintaining the buildings that they are being educated in, and taking those students home. So 94% of the expenditures of the district go into those program codes.
All right. Anything further? All right. Thank you, Gordon. That then takes us to the public hearing portion, item 6.8. So we are required statutorily to have a public hearing on the proposed budget. This year's budget is the 2018-2019 proposed budget. And if there's anyone from the public that would like to come and speak regarding the budget, now's the time. All right. Seeing no one, we will declare the public hearing closed. Move on to item 6.9, 2017-2018 supplemental budget. That's a budget fest.
The supplemental budget for the 17-18 year, so shifting gears now to making adjustments to the 17-18 budget. This is part of the, again, the allowable process under the statutes of the state of Colorado. There is a budget that is required to be adopted by June 30th for the coming year. There is an opportunity in January to adjust or amend the budget, and then there is another opportunity in June to provide supplemental budget to update the numbers based on information that has been gathered over the year. Remember that the budget is a snapshot in time, and there are changes that take place throughout the year. So there are 4 funds that, as part of the normal process, the part of the normal review process, as we start preparing for the independent audits of the district or the independent audit of various funds that we go through. There's 4 funds that have changes here or adjustments that are being brought to the board for their consideration for adoption at the next meeting. The memo does hopefully a reasonable job of explaining what those are. From the general fund perspective, we had fewer students than what we had projected in the budget, so that's a decrease in revenue, but that was offset by some unexpected or unplanned increases in revenue. Most notably, there was an $800,000 payment from the city of Loveland, which was their pledged portion of the construction of High Plains, the park at High Plains. So that was wrapped up last year in 16-17, the construction piece, but this amount was still outstanding and was received in the current fiscal year. So that was one of the biggest items that offset the reduction in revenue from a lower student count than what we had projected. The other funds, nutritional services, we're required to adjust those to make sure that we're not expending more than what has been authorized by the board. That's primarily associated with increased commodity costs for this year, for 17-18. That's the increase in expenditures you'll see there. Student fees is really, we've had a little more revenue that's been collected this year from student fees in that fund, but we also plan to spend that money, so that's a net effect of 0. And then the last fund is the Educational Memorial Fund. The Foote Foundation made a request of the district to transfer those dollars that the district was managing for the Foote Memorial Fund for scholarships. They requested primarily because the attorney that was the trustee on that account is preparing to retire and go out of practice. So they had requested that we transfer that responsibility to TEF. So the program does not change any, it's just who's managing it. Rather than the attorney being the trustee, now TEF is the trustee of those funds. That's why you see the reduction of that amount.
Questions, Jeff?
Nutritional services. I noticed on our earlier slide, earlier presentation on the budget, they were down like about $100,000. Now here it's negative 154. What's happening with nutritional services?
There are, commodity prices have increased. We have an agenda item coming up to talk about the prices that we charge for school meals. It's trying to adjust those and match that to be the enterprise fund that it's intended to be, to make sure that it operates at a break-even perspective. Some of it is revenue, which we'll talk about in a minute. Other is increased cost, especially when we look into next year at 18-19 with the salary increase. There are some of the nutrition services workers that are impacted by the minimum wage change going to $11.10 per hour. That's one of the areas where, although we have very few positions across the district that are impacted. A lot of those are in nutrition services, so seeing some wage pressure there that has impacted that as well. I will add, in addition, there's some restructuring, reorganization that's taking place within nutrition services to go to more of a centralized production standpoint, meaning meals will be prepared as much as possible at a centralized kitchen, 3 centralized kitchens in the district, and then move to the schools where there'll be the final prep, meaning heating and any final prep that needs to be done, then served, and then the cleanup taking place at the individual schools. But there will be efficiencies gained there as well. So certainly your question is right on the mark of asking why is there use of fund balance in that particular fund, Nutrition Services, Fund 21. Those are some of the areas that are in play and certainly are areas that are being addressed.
Thank you.
Follow-up. Do you anticipate in the upcoming year they will run at neutral?
The 18-19 year, if you look at the budgets, they are budgeted at a $100,000 use of reserves, I believe.
Are we just talking nutrition services again now?
Yeah.
Only nutrition services.
So-
He's following up my question earlier in the budget. It showed in parentheses a negative approximately 100,000.
But on nutrition services part?
Yes.
So I would imagine that the the agenda item where we're going to talk about the fees will address some of this. We'll get more into that more specifically in nutrition services, yes?
Correct.
Okay.
But if I could just answer this one question while I have the nutrition services budget up, and I'm glad to pull it up on the screen for people to see as well. Projected revenue for the 18-19 year at 5.5 million and 5.6 million of cost or expenditures. So yes, about $100,000 use of reserve balance that is available in the fund. They certainly do have that. It's still after setting aside the Tabor Reserve. These funds have the same Tabor Reserve requirements as any other fund as well. But there's still available reserves to work through the restructuring plan and then adjust with the new meal, the increase in the meal prices that are being proposed.
So I'm sorry, but I just want to clarify now. So I misunderstood you. These are not general fund reserves. These are specific to that particular fund. So basically, you are running zero cost, you're not impacting our general reserve.
Impact to the general fund reserves is no impact. That is correct.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
So the $100,000 that they may have to use in reserves, is that not considering what we might vote on here in a minute? So if we do raise meal cost, then that number is going to be different?
The increase in meal costs proposed are already built into the 18-19 budget, yes.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll be asked to approve that supplemental budget at the next meeting. Any further questions? All right, that takes us to 6.10, 2018-19 federal grants.
This item is something that's brought before the board every year for their first discussion and then approval. There's a requirement for any federal grants, programs that the board is interested in the district pursuing, that the board has to authorize the approval to apply for these grants. So from the memo that's attached and the attachment to the memo, you can see the federal grants that we have in place and what those applicable dollars are. After reviewing these, I can say that most of these have increases. There are a couple that have slight decreases, but most of the funds from a federal perspective show an increase for the next year from a revenue perspective or the grant dollars that are available.
So that was going to be my question. I'd like to see the versus last year amount, if possible. You don't have to do it right now if you don't want, but an
If you look
email.
at the budget deck, there will be a separate slide for federal
Just this
grants.
thing? Okay, then I can find it.
This budget document that's posted on the website and is attached to board docs as well. There's a slide in here that is or a page that is federal grants, Fund 22. and it will show you all of the grants, all of these grants listed from a revenue perspective, the 17-18 budget versus the 18-19 budget.
Okay, and it calls it out like that?
It does.
Within there? Okay.
Absolutely. The
Okay.
column headings will show it specifically as that.
Okay,
Just-
thank you.
Just foreseeing, perhaps the board member has a question. Gordon, am I correct that the Forest Service had we had a significant decrease in grant from the Forest Service? Can you explain that, please?
That's not a grant. It was a royalty that's collected. That's a general fund item, not a grant fund item. So it's included in the other revenue portion of the general fund. But the district in the past has received, and will receive this year as well, albeit at a much lower rate, a royalty fee for logging that takes place within the district boundaries. So Larimer County has seen some, not increases, but we've seen a steady amount. It's not a hugely material amount, $40,000 or $50,000 a year, but that's gone down to $6,000 or $8,000 for the coming year.
Those more
As the one of the primary causes of that is as they've done logging in the mountains in Larimer County of the beetle kill, the pine beetle kill areas. As that winds down, those royalties come down as well.
Thank you. For some reason, I thought it was.
Isn't that's interesting, though, that, I mean,
Yeah.
you would have thought that beetle kill harvesting would affect the school district budget, right?
Right.
So many factors.
Well, maybe we should say timber or something.
The reach of the district is far and wide.
Yeah, yeah. Just a question about those grants in general. Refresh our memory. Are they competitive grants, or are they just you do your due diligence?
These
And
typically are not competitive grants. They, and I'm at a loss for the term that's not competitive, but entitlement grants, I believe, is the term that's used. The majority of these, if not all, are entitlement grants. So it requires certainly filling out the application, monitoring, as Lamb referred to earlier, the steps that we have to go through to make sure we're in compliance, following all the rules that are associated with these, especially being federal grants from the federal level. There's tremendous oversight. We have to report on a monthly basis. They don't give us the money all up front. We have to prepare budgets for each one of these grants specifically, and there's specific things that can and cannot be paid for out of the grant dollars. Very particular restrictions on that, and we have a grant accountant that does a lot of that work with the various people that oversee these grants from the district perspective. So I'm very confident from an accounting standpoint that we are in compliance, and there's one of these grants that every year is selected at some level for a single audit, they call it, as part of the audit that is looked at.
What's the difference between the entitlement versus a formula? Because some of these are called formula funds.
Can you provide an
One
example?
of them was
I read
student
that.
support
Turnaround.
and academic achievement was a
turnaround
formula,
network.
turnaround was a formula.
So those would be more, not so much competitive, but based on the needs that we can demonstrate for. So if a district applies for that grant and doesn't have any of those required characteristics, then the grant would be denied. Where an entitlement grant is, we know you're serving a title population, Title I, Title II, Title III, or Head Start, or any of those. We can demonstrate that we are servicing that population, and they make sure, certainly, before they approve the grant, that our expenditures are in line with how many students we say we're going to have in that type of program. They're very diligent in looking at the budgets. Outside of the budget that we do from a financial perspective, the financials we have to do in the budget for the grant application itself is very thorough.
Are all of these then district grants, like are any of them individuals? Pretty much just district?
All of these are just, all grants that we have would be
Have to be done through
district-wide.
the district.
so we have two funds. We have Fund 22, which is federal grants, which is what these are, and then we have Fund 28, which are state and local grants. So in the state and local, we have many more that are very specific. They might be $5,000 or $10,000 grant for a specific purpose, but it's still a district grant. It's just restricted on how those dollars can be spent.
Any other questions? All right, moving on to item 6 point, and back up a question. We will need to approve these next time, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
All of these are for
Okay.
discussion tonight and will be
And
brought
approval
to the
next time.
board again for approval at next meeting.
6.11 is employee vendors.
This again is an annual item that's brought to the board per policy. Any district employees that may have a business that they want to be a vendor for the district have to submit that desire in writing to ask for that permission or for that ability to be a vendor. And this memo shows there's not a huge list and very little dollar amount that's associated with these vendors. Some of these had, and you see in the last column, in 17-18, had no amounts that were paid to them by the district, but they've still filed the necessary paperwork to put in front of the board for their approval of these being district vendors. They would still follow all of the same competitive processes depending on the materiality of the purchases that are being sought. If that involved an RFP or a request for quote or anything like that, they would follow all of the same rigor that any other vendor would follow from a procurement standpoint.
Questions, board?
I'm just curious on the criteria or the decision-making, how we approve or don't approve, who gets on there, who doesn't. Is it a formality, or how would I know that maybe I should question some of these, or if they're all good to go, or?
I would say the board could request information on the details of the type of expenditures. We can provide that historically, what the type of expenditures were. We tried to do that with the product or service that's being provided, but short of printing the AP detail, the accounts payable detail, or looking at an individual vendor and getting down to the invoice level, I would ask for a bit of discretion with procurement, that they are vetting these as well. Vetting first that the paperwork is accurate. Second, vetting that it is an appropriate expenditure. Certainly there's not going to be anything that's inappropriate here, just as we wouldn't buy from any other vendor.
Well, in short, if we don't see any obvious conflict of interest, we usually just move forward with it.
That's been the typical pattern in the past, but I'm certainly glad to have staff work on providing whatever documentation the board would require beyond this.
Any other questions? All right, that'll come back next time. Moving on, 6.12, State of Colorado Interest-Free Cash Flow Loan Program.
So rather than pulling up the attachment here that is the resolution that the board will be asked to approve at the next board meeting, I'm going instead to pull up the memo that has a little bit more information on it. So the board will recall that the state of Colorado offers an interest-free cash flow loan program that the board elected to have the district participate in the 17-18 year. This is it comes about because of the timing of receiving portions of the School Finance Act funding, those being primarily the local property taxes that are assessed, collected, and remitted locally to property owners within the district boundaries. So those collections typically take place. They start with the calendar year, and they're usually remitted to the district in March, April, and June are the primary months when those dollars are received from the county treasurers to the district. So a significant portion, if you will recall, $117 million of the total revenue of the district is from School Finance Act funding sources, and those would be these local property taxes that I referred to, the specific ownership tax, which is a small portion of the vehicle licensing fees. That's a small portion, and then the state equalization piece is the backfill that the state makes up. So our expenditures are fairly uniform over the 12 months of the year, but our revenue collection of that 117 million, about 40% of that 117 million is primarily received over a 3-month period from March, April, May. So it causes districts an issue with cash flow more than anything. That's what it is. It's a cash flow issue. That's how it's, that's why the state instituted this, this approach based on the way districts are funded from the school finance perspective. So the district did participate in this for the first time in 17-18. There was, as you see here, a $6.5 million draw or borrowing that was done in January, a $3.8 million borrowing that was done in February, and then when we received our first large portion of local property taxes from the county assessors or county treasurers in March, that full amount was paid back. The resolution calls for the full amount to be paid back by June. We were well ahead of that time frame. I think it's important to note as well, there were 22 districts across the state that participated in this program in 17-18, and you can see the list of some of those larger districts with Denver Public Schools, Boulder Valley, Cherry Creek, Douglas County, Aurora, Poudre, Windsor, and other smaller districts that participated, as well as Thompson. So it's a program. Absent that, the district would experience cash flow difficulties during those months, and quite honestly would probably we would have to go out and look to secure short-term borrowing from a fiscal institute that would certainly charge us interest. This is an interest-free option that's managed, that's provided by the state of Colorado, but managed by RBC Capital, an underwriting firm in Denver.
Questions, Board?
I don't think this is relevant, and I'm just curious. We're just talking about the title funds. So we ever run into issues where they don't always get their payments to us on time? We don't get those funds. Does that factor in this, or we handle that a separate way?
The funds are pooled. There are certain funds that are excluded from the calculations. There's a cash flow requirement, a schedule or a spreadsheet that has to be filled out and go to RBC, who manages the program, as well as the state. And there's dollars across all those funds that, while yes, there are sometimes cash flow issues with those funds, with a federal grant or a nutrition services funding, that the general fund may cover with a transfer on a short-term basis. We also, for purposes of this cash flow loan program, also get to take advantage of the cash that those funds have in the bank, because all the other funds are typically more static as well, with a more equal amount over the 12 months than what the general fund is, because such a large portion of the general fund revenue comes in that 3-month period. So it is a bit of a pooling. So at times there is payment of, we've incurred the payments, the expenditures for a federal fund that's then remitted or reimbursed to us in arrears, but that's usually about a 1-month lag, and we have the cash flow available to cover that. A lot of times within the same fund. Very seldom do we have to do a cash transfer from the general fund into another fund, because the timing is much tighter in those than it is from the general fund perspective.
Any more questions? All right, that will come to us next month, or next meeting as well.
But the resolution is attached there, and it is a fairly lengthy resolution, but it's the same resolution that was adopted this year. But if the board has any questions on that, feel free to address those questions to me, and if I don't have the answer, I'll get them addressed.
Next up is item 6.13, nutritional services rate increase.
This is the item that was referred to earlier. You can read the details in the memo itself, but really more importantly is when we get down to some of the information that's provided below. So you can see through an informal process of polling the other neighboring districts what their meal prices are. This indicates that Thompson meal prices are, for the most part, in line with other neighboring districts. Important consideration that I would look at on this chart, the bar chart, is typically you'll see the increase history being about every 3 years. There's been a rate increase for nutrition services meal costs. For this particular time period, it's a 4-year period, so the fund has gone a year longer than it typically does before coming back to the board and asking for some sort of rate increase on the meals. So what has been proposed is a 25-cent per meal increase for both breakfast program and the lunch program. And you'll see the different prices. Their elementary prices are different than the secondary prices, but you'll see the same pattern that is shown there. This increase of 25 cents, if it were not built into the budget, which it is right now, would result in about $150,000 to $160,000 less in revenue projected for the fund for the 18-19 school year. That's based on serving well over 1.5 million meals a year, both breakfast and lunch combined.
Questions, Paul?
So in addition to needing to keep up with our costs, are there statutory requirements that we have to keep costs at a certain level? And does that cover this? And then how long would it cover that statutorily? Are we going to be coming back in a year or two, or is it typically that 3 years?
Typically, the pattern is 3 to 4 years. There is a statutory requirement for the free and reduced program. I can't remember the exact name of the requirement, but it's to make sure that what we're pricing our meals at is at a level that is sufficient to ensure the federal funding for the free and reduced program. There is a spreadsheet that has to be completed and remitted to them. Even without doing any meal increases, we would have been 9 cents below that statutory limit. So we would have had to have increased to still maintain the federal funding for the free and reduced program by 9 cents. This is just another step beyond that, again, consistent with past pattern to in an attempt to ensure that the fund operates on an enterprise basis, meaning a break-even basis.
So the intention is to be on a break-even basis. Are we losing money on the free and reduced lunches?
No, those are reimbursed. Whatever rate we put in, the
covers the cost.
The reduced amount and the free amount is provided back to us. Yes.
So then we are, if I remember the number you just presented correctly, $150,000. We have to draw out our reserves for the whole nutrition program?
100.
100,000.
Is planned for
Okay, what is the amount of our reserves in that fund?
about 600,000, I believe, right now. I can get you that number very quickly here.
And what is the reasoning that we're drawing down the reserve instead of raising the price to make us break even this year?
Further reduction of that reserve balance, I would point to some of the same situations we experience in the general fund from a maintenance backlog perspective. We have aging equipment in the kitchens that is more difficult to repair, replace. As those items fail, they have to be replaced so we can continue serving meals.
That's not my question. My question is, why aren't we raising the price so we do break even? We have costs. And why do we make the decision to draw down 100,000 of our reserves instead of raising the price?
Understand. The board could certainly elect to do that. It would be a more significant increase to the per meal cost. Anytime there is an increase in meal costs, which there hasn't been in my tenure in the district, but from empirical data, Every time there is a rate increase, it does impact a bit the meals served. So there are less meals served when there's a rate increase. So to try to have it be a reasonable, tolerable level of 25 cents a meal rather than 50 or 60 cents a meal that it may need to be to allow the fund to break even is the rationale that's been proposed.
Dr. Shear, will you comment on that, please? I mean, you think it's a good, I mean, obviously, you do think it is
Well,
good. 'cause you
there's
do
a
the
couple of
budget.
things. Yes. First of all, you have somewhat of a lag. This is kind of a lag situation where you catch up with those costs, especially when you know you have the reserves to do it in the first place. The second issue you're fighting all the time is trying to keep your costs relatively within range, but at the same time, remember, we're serving groups of kids across the district, and as much as possible, I would hate for us to be charging a lot more just so we could balance a budget when we know we have $600,000 in reserves. So we put that together in terms of timing for that. So there's a lot of different factors that go in that, and this is fairly typical of what happens with food service programs, especially when they're healthy like this one is, as far as the reserves are concerned, and it's planned. It's a planned expenditure, and as much as possible, extending as far as you possibly can the opportunity for these food costs, or the food costs to our students, to be as low as possible. So it's a number of different things going on at the same time, and then, you know, typically this time of the year is when you bring these things up. So that's part of it's just a planned reduction, and at the same time doing everything you possibly can to make this program attractive. And as Gordon has said, you have to be careful you don't do things that discourage people from participating in the program. So all of those things are going into this to try to come up with something that is reasonable. And certainly we're fortunate. We have a very good food services program and these kinds of things. This has been pretty much the pattern in the past too. One issue I would like to bring up, and I only do this because of full disclosure and all that, and because this is in discussion right now, but and I don't do this to point anything out, but it's important, I think, to ask the question so that you don't find yourself in a situation where somebody might come to the board and say, well, you have a conflict of interest here, and it has to do with Mr. Banks. As we all know, his wife works directly for that program and is paid out of that program in terms of revenue. So as we move forward in decision-making, as an action item, you can either decide to, on your own as a board or whatever, or we can actually have it researched by our attorney to see if there in fact is a conflict of interest relative to the board policy, because I don't want to see you guys and gals get into a situation where that might be questioned. That's another issue, but I just want to make sure that's on the table tonight, just in case it comes up.
Jeff, yeah?
I applaud the district for the decisions that have been made here, and I agree going a quarter up is a very good decision. Of course, we'd like to see everybody pay their own way, but it's expensive for families. But it's phenomenal how the costs are increasing for food, because there was $150,000 last year that we're behind. It's going to go up another $100,000 next year, plus we're raising the cost for meals for kids. That's a phenomenal increase, and I think it's important enough that when we're having conversations with the public and we're talking about needing money, that they need to understand that we're a conduit for a lot of other businesses and the cost of things in society. We're not creating the cost. They're being passed on to us, and unfortunately, it's got to be passed on to the taxpayer.
We never want to price our children out of being able to afford a meal. A lot of times they really depend on these lunches as a solid and hot meal of the day. So
Right.
I think a quarter is, the maximum we want to jump up.
I could offer a couple more points of clarification to Mr. Swanty's question on the $154,000 on the supplemental budget would be really considered a worst-case scenario. We don't expect it to be that much. We expect it to be less than that, but to stay within statutes to make sure we're not spending outside of what has already been budgeted, we need to have that that buffer, if you will.
What do we expect it to be?
That's the beauty of having an audit that's done every year that will show that. I would guess if you pressed me for an answer, I would say 100 to 125,000, not the 150,000. Still a substantial number, no doubt, but less than the 154 that we have built in right now as
Still
a.
substantial.
Yes. The other point of inefficiency that we have to deal with on a daily basis is the cooler space that we have. So buying in bulk, obviously, when we get truckloads of food in, and we have a nutrition services employee here that could answer this better than I, that the warehouse space that we have, especially the cooler space, has limitations on it. That meaning that we can't get 3 truckloads of commodity-priced commodities, food, because our freezer space won't allow that. So we maximize that space as much as possible. It's a constant game of, giant game of Tetris when you go over to the warehouse, to the freezer space there, to make sure we're rotating things out, in and out, to get the products that we need to meet the menus for that week. The staff does a tremendous job in making sure we're as efficient as possible, but we are limited somewhat we feel the impact of those food cost increases because of the lack of space, that we can't buy in as large a quantities as we might otherwise be able to.
Gordon, have we ever looked into what the cost effectiveness would be if we did purchase more refrigeration space, and how long it might take to actually save money by purchasing more, commodities in bulk?
Payback period.
Right.
What's the return on investment, the
Right.
payback period? I have not done
Yeah, I mean, it's
a
kind of a-
significant analysis of that. Refrigeration is pricey, certainly. So at 25 cents a meal, or at whatever discount we would get from being able to order larger quantities, would have certainly some length of payback period, but I can't answer that without
just curious.
more data.
Good on that one. We could actually research that through Littleton, because we actually built a much larger storage space, refrigeration space, and we rented the space out to other school districts as sort of the major distributor of.
Became a business.
It became a way for us
Distribution center.
and Sheridan School District and Inglewood, I believe, was involved, and some of the other districts in the area actually took advantage of some of our freezer space. But we had the room for it, too.
And you
I
will
have
reduce.
Jeff, I have Jeff next.
It's kind of an old question now, but I ask this with all due respect. I'm pondering the conflict of interest with Paul's wife and Paul. I don't understand that, because we've had employees that work for the district. Is she in a position where this would benefit her financially, or where's our conflict? Just so we know as a board when we're making future decisions.
I think it's a great question, and I think it's worth having it researched, because it's unusual, it's different. We have the situation which is unique in this case in terms of a board member being directly involved in making decisions regarding additional revenue in an enterprise fund, which is where the salaries come out of. So I think it's worth at least researching it. But I want to do that with full disclosure, so everybody understands why I'm doing it, not because I'm trying to give somebody a hard time, as much as making sure that nobody on the board, including Paul, finds themselves in a situation. We're still in discussion right now, and if it's all right with the board, I'll have that research done with our general counsel to make sure we're on firm ground. But I think it's worth asking the question.
Mark, does your wife work for the district?
Yes, that's correct. She's a teacher.
And what would the difference be, I guess, would be my question.
The question would be, it's a good question. The question, when we get to the final decision on budget, the question would be whether or not, Mark should vote on that budget or not, because it's going to impact the raise that she receives. So I think we can research that from both points of view. But I bring this up because conflict of interest became a huge political interest issue in this district a few years ago, and was used politically to make some really strong statements about whether people actually had the right to be on the board. We have plenty of information regarding, that kind of thing, as far as case law and all that, and as far as board members. But in this case, it's a little bit more unique because of the enterprise fund, which is different than the general fund.
Yeah, I really don't want to stir things up, but in hearing that, so really the conflict of interest would have come when we approved the 6.25% raise already. Because once we voted on that, it applied to both situations, so we probably should have known then rather than now, but I'm fine either way.
Whatever. I'm waiting for direction from the board. If you want me to have it researched, fine. I think when it gets specific to where you're raising prices, though, and revenue,
I would personally like to know. Just
Yeah, I think it should be.
So would I.
It'd be a comfort for you guys to
Accountability.
know, yeah.
Yeah, you want a formal
I don't
motion
think we
or?
need that. I don't think we
No,
need
I
that.
don't think we need more.
I just need
understand.
direction,
Just-
that's all.
And it's no reflection, obviously.
Oh,
It's no reflection
no.
on you, it's a protection, you know, just.
And Barbara, do you teach teachers in the district?
No,
Okay, good.
I'm done with that.
That's that left end of the
I'm just
board.
super sensitive about the issue.
Oh, absolutely,
No, it's
absolutely,
good. It's good
absolutely.
to understand.
So we will be asked to approve this rate increase next meeting, correct?
Correct.
All right. There's no other questions on nutritional services? Okay. We will move on to item 6.14, student fees. So these are policy changes. JQE, student fees, ECA/ECAB, security access to buildings, JFABD, homeless students, I'm assuming, and KBA, District Title I, parent involvement policies. Dr. Crespo.
Evening again. I'm just here to answer any questions related to the policies that you have in front of you.
The reminder that these will be up for, excuse me,
Yes.
up for adoption next time.
Yep.
Quick question, what motivated these changes? Where was the recommendation coming from?
So for the homeless one, it comes back to the ESSA requirement for the last policies that we've seen. The safety security you actually saw earlier this year, we realized in doing our EOP that there was a language change, just a sentence around exterior doors remaining closed during the regular school day. We have it in a procedure, but we felt that it was important to bring it back to the board to make sure, based on all the things that are happening across the country, that it's explicit in the board policy. Student fees, you also saw prior to, you would have seen it in January, December or January. We had a couple of classes that came up this year through CIC that were requested and approved, and therefore are requesting fees, or we can't offer the classes. So that was a change. The same one with District Title I, that came from the ESSA requirements related to Title I, homelessness, how we report, and there we go. And the parent involvement is the same. So you've seen a lot of these over the last couple of months. It's just tweaking that language that's required through ESSA. The one that you saw way back was the fees. It's a timing issue, and in the past, we've held off on the fee conversation, and this year felt that it was important to do it because the classes that we're offering really do have an impact financially if kids want to be involved in what that looks like. Yes, ma'am.
Are they new?
They are. So the two classes that we're offering that are approved by CIC for pilot, I just had it.
Design, something or other.
Yeah.
Seminar. And then there was video production?
Yep. So they're in red, design seminar and the other one, which was the production class. It's video production. What we're doing is offering a 1 through 3 course. So we have, a few years back, we offered the video production 1, then 2. Now we're at a place where we have enough kids to offer the 3, and in order to do that, it has a cost.
And students who are free and reduced lunch, do they get a discount?
They're waived.
They're waived
Waived
completely.
or reduced. Mhm.
Thanks.
Any other questions on the policy changes? Okay, we'll look at those for action next time. 6.15, the 2018-19 and 2019-20 Ferguson High School variance calendar. Or calendar variance.
This calendar comes before you every year based on their request for the system that they use for Ferguson and for the students' success. They've had a lot of years of practice of how to keep the kids engaged. The advantage is that this is a 2-year because we adopted a 2-year district calendar, so we're able to do a variance that aligns for the next 2 years.
Questions, board? And we will look at that for approval next time as well. And item 6.16, which is 2018-2019 Board of Education meeting calendar. And so that's our calendar for the next school year, and it's showing up really weird on my,
I like the color.
like the red and green. Can you pull your calendar? It's not looking.
Looking for Ferguson?
No, for the Board of Education meeting calendar, I can't get it all to show up. I can't get the end of December in there.
Oh, you want it all in one?
Yeah, I want to be able to look at it all, see it all. I can't see that either. Okay, I've got it here. So this is the proposed calendar for meetings for our meetings for next year. You'll note that, oh, sorry, I don't want to. You will note that the regular meetings are pretty much the same. There's a couple of
Regular meetings are red.
Right.
Study sessions are green.
Study sessions are green, which are the third Thursdays. There's some variances in some of the strange months like November because of Thanksgiving. So we have the first Wednesday, which is normal, but then we skip to the fourth Wednesday to get another meeting in November because we're on vacation, the 21st, the third Wednesday. And then because of the way Christmas falls this year and Christmas winter break vacation, we will have...
On Casby.
And Casby, correct. So that blue is Casby with the retreat or study session, thank you, on December 5th, with the one regular board meeting on the 12th. And then that takes us to, oh, sorry, this is slow. January, where there is one meeting scheduled in
Regular,
January.
one study, yeah.
Because of the holidays. And then I think we go back to something fairly normal for February. March again has spring break in there. April is regular, sort of a regular schedule. May and June. So questions, comments? Go ahead, Paul, and then Mark.
I'll get mine out of the way, and you guys can comment on too, just because I love having meetings with you guys. But I do think we have a lot of work to do. The consideration of adjusting January and trying to have two business meetings in January.
Second meeting in January.
Otherwise, we have one meeting from December 13th all the way through February. There's just like a 9-week period in there that.
So we could throw one in, probably.
And do like the 9th and the 23rd or something. It's still 2 weeks apart.
We could. That
Or the whatever. Yeah, just squeeze another one in there.
Didn't we do that actually? Didn't we make that change
Perhaps.
and go from the 9th to the 9th and the 23rd?
I will check, but we can certainly, I can make that adjustment.
What do you guys think?
We'll whine when the time comes.
Yeah, you can whine, and that's fine. Just like my kids, you whine. It's not going to do any good, but. All right, so let's go ahead in January then and switch that from the 16th and go to the 9th and the 23rd.
And would you still like to keep that study session on the 17th?
I think so.
Okay.
I don't see any, let me get back up there and look at it and see what it looks like. Yeah, it's in the middle,
sense,
yeah.
yeah.
And wait, Mark and then Jeff.
So that takes care of the primary concern that I had. I was also interested in March. In the event that we get into, say, January, February, and we start identifying something that's going on and an activity that we might feel, hey, we really need another meeting, is it possible for us to schedule a March meeting if we find that it's necessary as we approach that date, that month?
We can call a special meeting with notice. I think it's only 2 members of the board have to request it. So, like, if you think we need it and I agree, then that's 2 members and we can go forward. But as long as the timing is, as long as there's, I think it's 48 hours notice. Don't quote me on that, I don't have it on the top of my head, but yes, short answer is yes, we can.
Okay, good.
Just not during spring break. That would be a bad idea. And Jeff?
We may have already had this conversation, but I'd just soon have our study sessions on a Thursday, not the day after a board meeting. Because we have meetings back to back.
Right.
And could be we've already had this conversation,
Well-
you told me it wasn't going to work, but.
No, we could. The thing is like to try and keep it, and I don't care one way or the other, but the consideration is, do we want to keep it so that it's every third, because like our regular meetings are generally the first and third Wednesday, right? And so our whatchamacallit, our study session ended up being the third Thursday. Sometimes the third Thursday is after the third Wednesday, but it isn't always, right? I mean, sometimes we've
Correct.
had it where, just because of the way the month is. And I think we settled on doing it that way because there's other district meetings that are like the second Thursday or the
committees.
first Thursday or, so I'm fine with either way. I mean, I kind of tend to agree with you. It's hard to have, especially if they're long meetings. We could certainly change it. I mean, it's a year ahead.
The exception of November and January, which we
Right.
just changed.
Right.
It happens in every case.
Right.
Or they're back to back.
So we could certainly look at that intermediate, see, then we'd be looking at like the second Thursday, and what meets on the second Thursday? Anybody know off the top of their heads?
The second Thursdays.
Is that open or is that?
Thompson to Life.
No, actually.
The second Thursday?
I know Dave and I had talked about, since, I travel a lot to see my elderly parents, it's really tough when we've got three out of the 4 weeks of the month is very difficult for me, just because I'm back in Indiana once every 5 to 6 weeks to take care of my parents. So that's just my problem with adding it a different weekend to the
Now, I'll make
month.
sure you're not picking weeks to go visit them when we have back-to-back meetings happening.
I have not done that yet. I usually know when to schedule it, but that's just me. So, I'm obviously
And
not
I
the
guess we can always
majority.
be flexible. I was just throwing this
Which
out
we
as a-
have,
yeah.
because as we've come up where something's more critical and we don't want to wait and we want to move it forward or.
We have moved 'em.
So we have moved them around when it suits us, but we have to start with some formal,
Maybe we should have a study session to talk about our
to
study
talk
sessions.
about our study sessions?
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I don't think that's a good idea. So, and we could split the difference. We could do, I don't know, we could look at months where, or were you going to have an idea, Dave?
Well, no, I was going to say, just as you said, some will come, there'll be
Yeah.
not this back-to-back, and some will be
There's 2
different.
right now that are not back-to-back, right, 3.
January and November, what else?
March.
March is not either.
March is a pretty meeting light month.
I'll just say I can't do the 4th Thursday.
So we could move it back. We could move some around to the second Thursday.
Let's take it month to month.
You want to just leave it and wing it, and if we need to move them, as we need to move them?
Yeah.
Well,
I think
and in August, depending on when we do the retreat, the new board retreat,
Mm-hmm.
so that 16th date might fluctuate in August as well.
Right, so we may not have that one on the 16th, or we might decide we want to keep it. I mean, that's totally up to us. We can meet, we can add or delete meetings as we need to, as long as there's the proper notice.
Do we have a board retreat date?
Not close. We are close. Dave?
Could we make sure that we don't cancel any meeting without the board approval? Why is that?
Well, because I generally don't, I don't generally take and cancel a meeting for no reason. I've moved them, or I've suggested that we have. But there could be a situation where we need to. I don't think I've ever unilaterally canceled a meeting. I hope I haven't, out of the blue.
But I mean, just going forward, in my mind, if this is I like these ideas of these Thursdays meetings. A couple were canceled, and I had no say in it. So I would like to have a say, just up and down.
I don't know, what do you guys think? I mean, I guess my concern is that when there's a timing issue, certainly I don't want it all to be on me.
I mean, is there a set procedure? I mean, is that under your purview of it as the president to call meetings or cancel meetings, or is there some rule that I don't know about that guide to that?
Honestly, don't know. Jeff?
I would just say as a courtesy, if nothing else, regardless of what the rules are, that if there's enough time, we should ask for board input on changes of meetings. But if there's those situations where something important's come up and you need to make a quick decision, I mean, that's why we have a president when we
Right.
can't get the board together.
I
But
think that's what I'm saying. For example, scheduling this retreat we've gone through 3 rounds of calendaring, and we still haven't settled on a date. So sometimes there are, instances where it might happen to be that way, but I know we've moved meetings.
I would just ask going forward,
Certainly.
Okay, that's fine.
Absolutely.
That's of course fine.
All right. Anything else on the calendar?
bet you didn't think we were going to talk this long about the board calendar.
Well, sure. We talk about ourselves more than we talk about anything else.
Is this a 2-year calendar or
This is
1-year
a
calendar?
one-year calendar. This is a 1-year calendar. And then
Maybe we should
actually it'll be
form a
somebody else.
subcommittee, calendar committee.
You can be it.
Oh, I'm already on
Nope,
one.
so that will come back for,
And then we'll run it by council.
that will come back for approval at the next
Give me
meeting.
your Indiana state.
And there are no written reports, I do believe. Future agenda items and requests for information.
Madam President, if I could, there are just 3 items I think they're appropriate. One, previously the board said that we would ask for public input on the redistricting of schools. I think we should include that the board has voted to close 2 schools. So what is the new redistricting for Stansbury and Truscott? Where do they go? So that should come.
I think that's
No,
been
no.
decided.
It's in the newspaper.
It
The
never
board
came to the
hasn't
board.
decided it.
I don't
We don't
think
have
the board decides it.
Well, I mean, I don't understand the difference between we're redistricting, it goes to public comment, and then the board reviews and approves it for what we're doing, or what we had on our agenda today, and then we're closing 2 schools, we don't do it. I think the same logic would apply.
So up until today, we didn't have a policy actually for the board to take public comment and review for reboundarying. It was basically our call. After hearing from a couple members of the community, the board felt that maybe we should back up, hear from the community a little bit more. My understanding is Dr. Crespo and others have met with the Van Buren and the Stansbury communities already. That's already happened. Do you want to come on up here, Dr. Crespo?
So we've actually met with both communities, and we have meetings scheduled, and we've sent out minutes of what those conversations look like, and we brought forward what their concerns were moving forward, and we have a calendar and preliminary work started, so that's where we are. We have not ever in the past brought boundaries to a community conversation. Certainly, the board feels that that's appropriate as we move forward, so we will do that. That's it.
Okay, so I guess I'm a little confused now. So boundary changes like we have in front of us, the board's supposed to approve them. But when we close schools, we don't approve the
They were
boundary change?
part of the package that you approved around moving Stansbury, closing those buildings. That was all part of that discussion. And very honest, well, nope, mm-mm.
I don't remember.
As well as the policy, the workbook policy in there, right? The procedure was set out in there that you'd have meetings with the communities and hear from them. For instance, they, in one case, strongly said we'd all like to go together somewhere, which I think is much more important than us saying, you know, 6 of them are going here because it fits. I think
Correct.
it's a little bit different of a situation.
And as well as, remember, we've talked about closing schools and where those kids would go for over 18 months. And the reality for us is that the parents felt very strongly in this scenario, very strongly in both buildings, please don't separate our kids. Even parents that had open enrolled are asking how to open enroll their kids and get grandfathered into where we're going.
I'd like to talk about going forward, not what we've done, because I don't know that we've done anything wrong here, and I don't want to suggest it in any way, but I think going forward, the board should be involved in that decision, at least know what's going on. I would agree with Dave. I think it's important that the board has a chance to weigh in on it.
See, I am not objecting to anything that was done or the decision that was made. I think we'll all come to the same conclusion. I would just like to see us reopen the process so there's a formal process of everybody got an email, we're gonna have a meeting on this. I think we're gonna go out to the public for a bond and an MLO. And when I read the public response, I was a little disappointed on the public response to confidence in the board. And I think we should make every effort to absolutely demonstrate we're doing everything to receive public input. Even though you did, and I'm sure you did, I just like to document it, et cetera. I just think that's got its value.
So you're suggesting we go back now?
Well, I'm just I'm suggesting that we send out an email in the spring, in August, and say, we are opening for public comment what we should do for the boundary. I was unaware, I just didn't do a good homework job, that we approved the boundary change. I did not know that was in the
So I just want to clarify that we did do exactly what you're talking about when we talked to the families and the closure was done, which is how I have the feedback, and we sent multiple emails, which is how I have the feedback that they want to stay together. Now, because elementaries are a little different and there's so few students in those buildings, the boundary impact is insignificant and will be for the foreseeable future.
Well, I agree.
So we were very clear.
If you sent the emails, then I withdraw my motion. I withdraw it. If you sent those emails, that's.
Yep, we sent it the night the board made the decision, the next day, the day after, then we had the meeting, and then we sent another email update, and there's a calendar series of probably 20 events over the next year to bring those kids together. My caution is that it would be very disruptive at this point to come back and then tell these families that you want feedback. That's just, we're talking 150 people at each of those sites.
Your recommendation. Thank you, Dr. Crespo. I'm fine with that.
Could we have you share that calendar with us?
Yes,
So we're
so-
at least aware of it?
I think it actually, for those of you that are super comfortable with Google Drive, I think it's on there and you have access to it. I know they were finalizing the draft yesterday because we were waiting for some dates. So I'll make sure you have that.
Google Drive?
Yep.
What it
It's going to
look
be
like?
under the closure timeline.
Okay.
If you have trouble accessing it, I'll get it to you. Where the principals from both of the buildings at each of the sites were coordinating what their dates looked like, because we want to make sure we're not stepping all over other buildings around ice cream socials, PTAs, that kind of stuff.
Okay, and wait, well, Dave had a couple, is it still on the same topic? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
I guess this is for Dr. Crespo. I want to make sure I understand it right. So going forward, the policy that you're putting together, will that include board involvement in the future or not?
So it is the board's discretion how they want to do the policy.
Well, that's why I'm asking. I would.
Right.
I might be one of 7, but
Sure.
going forward, I think the board should weigh in on it.
The feedback that is in the board policy that exists right now allows for that conversation to occur around boundaries. Certainly rewriting the policy to include those boundary discussions, I hear loud and clear. I will say that my concern around that is that the only conversation happening right now that has raised a concern is changing a high school boundary. We have not heard from elementary or from middle schools, and we've heard from just the high school, which is going to happen when you move a high school boundary, regardless. So my feedback would be, there might be a consideration to say we want it to, if it impacts high schools, because at the elementary and middle, it's not an impact. You haven't heard any feedback. And it's going to happen around Loveland High School and Thompson Valley regardless because of the historical perspective. And I will remind you that the board knows this, we've shared it, 44% of our students choice. The chances of kids that want to go to Loveland High not being able to in a 44% choice district, the only reason you have boundaries is for busing. And the only reason you have boundaries is because you're required statutorily to have a seat for every resident in that area. We don't have that now.
So before tonight, even before we heard this, not reading into too much, And it might have been just not do my homework. When we read the paper, or at least when I read that paper and saw the whole story, and there's like, I felt I didn't know. And someone asked me about it, I was like, I didn't know. So I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is we just want to be in the loop, be part of that, so we're not reading something in the paper. It's like, where were we in
The other
process?
consideration for a school closure is that when you pick a boundary, you're picking it based on the fact that you have room. And you don't want kids passing other schools to go to school. So certainly the board could have made a decision to send those kids to Carey Martin, but they're going from Van Buren to Namakwa because it is literally the closest school with enough space.
I think the right decision was the right decision.
Right.
It's being informed part and being in that loop.
Yeah, and I apologize if it wasn't clear in that conversation over the last 2 years.
That could be your fault, not yours. So my thought is that I would like to see a board policy presented to us that says no boundaries are reset without board approval. And before the board has that approval, there's an email sent out to every parent of every student affected, and there's public comment that way. That's how I see it.
So the change that the future person would have, because you're looking at multiple reviews of this policy, would include, this current policy does say board approval. What you're asking for is a mode of communication prior. Now, there's a significant difference between communication related to the boundary proposed change, and you're going to have an open forum where you're going to have people come to state their case. That's a decision the board has to make so that that policy is clear. Now, what you're saying now, Mr. Levy, is an email, which great. I would recommend that you just say communication in general, because tomorrow it could be Instagram. But it's just a very different discussion, and my recommendation would be that you be very clear about that public forum conversation, having been in a board meeting with 450 people.
Well, I don't mean that has to be at the board. It was my impression that you would conduct that meeting, that you would hear all the stuff, listen to it all, and bring that to the.
But we did that.
But just what was their complaint?
No, he means for the new changes, not for the closure changes.
Right, but we have done that in the past. When we went to this last meeting schedule of having community forums, those boundary changes came up repeatedly.
Well, what I'm saying is that two people came to us and said, we were unaware of it.
Because they were not specifically notified.
Exactly, that's what I'm trying to prevent.
To the affected
We've
families.
discussed it 3 times.
However.
Absolutely, because look what they told you. They
However.
told
We
you
have discussed it 3 times.
But we discussed it. They said to us, we didn't know about it till today. I'm trying to prevent that from happening.
And we'll likely have somebody come and tell us they didn't know lunch prices were going to rise either.
And we also did send an email to 16,000 plus families, letting them know that we were having a meeting around potential boundary, potential community forum, community, all of those pieces. I'm just trying to give you enough information so that when I draft this policy for the next person, they have enough information to make an appropriate presentation to the board, because we're in transition right now.
And I would like to caution us that just to remind us all, the job of policy is to be broad and not specific. And a wise attorney, who was probably the bane of my existence for 2 years, once said, don't make policy based on one instance. You don't make a policy based on something that happened once. So I'm not saying that we shouldn't look at this and study it, but I would like us all to keep that in mind, that we're policy-driven.
I just think this might be part of a bigger conversation. Go back to Dave's point is, we all try to communicate as effectively as we can, but the input continues to come back. The feedback, whatever we're doing, isn't reaching our community, and they're not satisfied with it. So I think it's just part of a larger conversation of how do we communicate in general? What are we missing? How do we improve that? And these are just a couple examples of maybe that bigger conversation.
Well said, thank you.
Jeff?
Paul stole my words.
Can I just ask for clarification before I walk away so I can start can I ask for an emergency clause related to boundaries? And here's why. To your point, Lori, if you limit that, then suddenly that discussion, if there's an emergency or if there's a crisis or it becomes a temporary to permanent fix, you need a clause in there that says that the board ultimately has the decision with or without a public email conversation. If we have a flood, if we have a fire, if we have a event, we can't frankly be tied. So I'm just requesting that we write that clause in there. Okay, great. I will send the draft on.
Okay, and then Dave, you had other?
Well, the other one was about the bond language, and this is what my concern is that we as a board voted on what we want to include in the bond. I think at that point in time, we have to be a little bit more specific of what we mean. We voted on what we said is an extension at Berthoud L and Ivy. There is no real definition of what that extension was.
That extension specifically for Berthoud and Ivy was 4 classrooms,
Classrooms.
without the need for a bathroom and a specific square footage related to what we would do for growth for the future.
So where was that language in where we said that, where
It was in the bond
Based on the
language related to the
package
MPC
2A.
recommendations
2A.
around the specificity of classrooms. We even had a conversation in MPC about why not 6 classrooms or 8 classrooms, and we felt that based on the growth over the next 10 years, 4 classrooms would be sufficient at both those sites. And after the MPC meeting, we went back to the architect and requested, did we really need bathrooms for that environment, based on your question, Mr. Levy?
Yeah, and somehow I think, it's my opinion, that it's not clear. It's just, in my opinion, it's not clear. I'm always called back to the fact that we spent a lot of effort last time and the bond failed. And here it is, I think we could be making some of the same mistakes we made last time. And I think when we say that, it should be simplified to say, this is what, when we pass it, this is what it says. Not a reference to some other document, not this, not that. It includes this and that.
So-
That's what I think we need to develop.
So if I may,
Sure.
part of the conversation is coming together as a board to have that discussion so that when we present that information to you, everybody's on the same page. So over the next couple of months, let me go back. Some of the things that we've done over the last couple of months to make sure that we are not going down the same path as the last time is to do a lot of community feedback, hear a lot of value statements, write the language specifically around what the community's requirements and requests are, so that when we're presenting that package, it's broad enough to be able to meet the requirements of a backlog maintenance issue that is critical in its failure, imminent failure for all those components, as well as write language that will be broad enough that people feel that every single school is having the most positive impact. Over the next few months, you'll start to see that same language that we presented at the last couple of board meetings in a more public conversation. So we provided to the board the overarching $90 million in backlog, specific not only to each school, but to the district as a whole, with those projects defined. That information will then go out to the community. The same will happen for each one around the mill. Once the language is determined, that financial estimate happens as a process. It's very different in public government than it is in private industry. So we're trying to follow the disclosures that we have to without spending a ton of extra money, so that we're being fiduciarily responsible for what we're spending every month before we get to this bond and mill.
Now, the board is going to vote on this bond and mill in August.
But the board is going to provide approval of language.
That's right. And that's 2 meetings away from it.
Correct.
So when you say months go by, there's 2 meetings. Yeah, sure.
If it's determined that you need more, you can always go to special meetings in
Meetings in July. if we
July.
need
And
to.
I've talked to Gordon about it. He's beginning to work with the bond attorney. Who writes that language, because it also not only has to be specific and meet the expectations of the board, but it also has to meet the TABOR requirements. So all of that's in progress right now and will be a part of the final conversation. I'll be honest with you, the last time, when we talk about learning something from it, I had people specifically say they were confused by the specificity of the ballot language, that it was too much.
Long, too long.
Too long.
Yep, too verbose.
So we have tried as much as we possibly can, in a number of ways, listen to that. Quite frankly, the way we frame these projects, and try to focus them in a way where we're not playing one school against another, and all that goes with it. We really feel like we've learned some good lessons through all of this process, and the things that we're ramping up for you all to have at the other end of this, hopefully will reflect the very things you're most concerned about in terms of making sure we cover those bases. So I think it's a part of the process. I think that it's coming, and you'll get a chance to certainly weigh in terms of how much or how general you want that ballot language to be. And there again, I think that you have to be willing to look at it from the point of view of how much more is needed from the board if you're still confused about it. Quite frankly, I'm kind of like, I'm confused that you're confused about some of the things that we are talking about tonight, because a lot of this information was presented in the past, and apparently it wasn't put in a context that made some sense to some of you on the board. And I apologize for that.
And just to remind everybody that when Dr. Scheer, you sent us the timeline in an email. It was titled Tabor Timeline, and there was a PDF. So the next big deadline is July 30th. We have to notify the county clerk in writing that we will be participating in the election. And then August 28th is the actual intergovernmental agreement, to conduct. And then September 7th, we need to certify the ballot language.
Right.
So that's just, so everybody kind of has that timeline framed, that September 7th is when we certify the ballot language.
I might even put a timeline up here in the boardroom for you, seriously. And certainly Gordon's monitoring that right now and paying attention. We just talked about those timelines in cabinet the other day. I'm thinking also that I had a thought, and it's gone in and out in terms of getting to specificity for the board. Oh, I know what it was. Your next big issue where you will get into some of the specificity, quite frankly, is the next board meeting, because you're going to be talking about the survey information and what it's telling us relative to developing those ballot questions. So you'll have that opportunity at the next board meeting.
So at the risk of furthering this discussion, we've talked about the additions to Berthoud and Ivy, but there's also a K-8 school that's going to be in there. So would we refer to that as a three-round K through 8 school with a capacity of 850 to 1,000 kids? I mean, is that the level of specificity you want in there? Or,
I think it should.
Because I want to
that.
be clear, because I'm not clear.
I think it should be, because when you say a K-8, see, the way I look at it is, all of a sudden the community said the board is now approved or has decided to issue a bond. For what? When we vote on it, it should be, that language should be right in there. If you want to keep it just that general, but you just can't say a K-8 school east of I-25 and mean anything. You say 3 rounds, you say that, at least you're saying what it means. Capacity of this many students, you're saying something. That's what I fear was missing and still missing. And I think we have to, I believe it's not well communicated to the community, and we should correct that as soon as possible.
We provided that level of specificity and failed. The feedback that we've received is that we need to keep it broad. We need to be specific around what are the projects that we can provide. The board approved a specific amount of funding, not the specificity of the projects. That gets translated to bond language that provides the deferred and those big projects around Ivy, Berthoud, K-8, all of those pieces. By being so specific, if one person, and we've learned this through the last, if one person doesn't like one aspect of it, they have voted no, even though they may have voted yes if they understood the broadness of every school being impacted positively. My recommendation is that you keep it as broad as possible in the language and provide the level of specificity that you have to once the bond and mill are approved anyway. You have to keep a running total, you have to keep a project update, you have to bring an administrator in who can do all of that specificity around estimates and what that looks like in a timely manner related to what's the funding related to the bond, what is it able to sell for, what are we able to collect, what's the price of whatever. All of those come into play after. I highly recommend that I caution going after that level of specificity in the ballot language. I would keep it at K-8, additions to these buildings, fixing backlog, and then making sure, which we're doing through those frameworks that we're putting out, that'll be posted at every building and the district around, here's how this funding supports my school. Additional classroom, changing a boiler, and here's the cost estimate to that, and that would be online as well. And frankly, those will launch here very shortly. We're simply waiting for the estimate piece related to the work we're doing. Here are the projects, and we can send people to that are interested at that level of detail. But overwhelming the common voter is not a good idea when they're looking for specifics around what does that impact my tax base. It's just, I've done a lot of research on this over the last 15 months and had success before.
I think this is stuff we can all think about. I mean, obviously, we don't have to, there's no call for any action tonight, no decision that needs to be made tonight, but I think we can think about that going forward as we refine this moving forward. Anybody else with future agenda items or requests for information?
Just one more.
You have one more? Yep.
Just, Gordon, I just wanted an update. When are we going to have our first audit committee meeting? You could issue solicited when they're pick the date, you make it happen. I'll be available. Thank you. That's it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Anybody else? All right, adjourned.
Don't forget your salad.
Thank you. Thank you, thank you.